We're joined by Noel Frame, who's running for re-election to the State House of Representatives, position 1. So go ahead with the 2-minute introduction.
Great. Well, thanks for having me here. I'm going to do a little bit of intro about myself because you guys know me, but people at home watching the video may not. So I'm Noel Frame, State Representative for the 36th District, first position. I'm running for re-election for the first time, so that's pretty exciting. It's almost weird to hear you say it. I am today, in my day job, a community development and planning consultant and longtime progressive community organizer and activist. I am so pleased to be serving in this position, and figured I'd just sort of recap sort of what motivated me to run and how I feel like I've delivered on that in these last couple of years. When I sought this position a couple of years ago, I said I sort of had 3 motivating factors: reforming the inequitable and regressive tax structure, increasing access to the American dream, and breaking down systemic barriers to success. In my time in the legislature, I have been lucky to serve on the House Finance Committee, all 3 sessions. I'm now the vice chair of that committee and have really truly been leading the charge on progressive tax reform in the House. I have supported capital gains tax. I have supported progressive real estate excise tax, progressive B&O tax, trying everything in my power to have a more progressive tax structure rather than just property taxes and sales taxes. I fought against really outrageous tax breaks, helped with getting the governor to veto one in particular, led the charge on clawing back Boeing's tax break, so this has been a big priority for me. Quickly, on increasing access to the American dream, I passed legislation to help make college more affordable for students, to help protect workers and getting fair wages. And in terms of reducing systemic barriers to success, I was able to successfully pass one of the biggest reforms to the juvenile justice system in 20 years, a reform that will help, I think, undo racial disproportionality in the racial justice, the criminal justice system, particularly because the kids we were talking about, 70% of them were kids of color, and really trying to create that access in the future to reentry into communities. So with that, I will happily take questions.
Great, thank you. So we have 4 prepared questions, and they're right there if you want to turn over the piece of paper and read along with us as we read them aloud. So 2-minute answers.
Spend so much time on the textbook.
Yeah. Then we read number 1.
What tax reforms are realistic in the next legislative session to address Washington State's regressive tax code, and what is your suggested strategy for achieving them? Longer term, what in your mind is the ideal tax structure for Washington State?
Absolutely. Great question. So in terms of what I think is realistic for next session, I absolutely believe it is possible for us to get a capital gains tax if we have an expanded Democratic majority. I hate to say it, but if we come back with the same folks in the legislature, including our same Democrats, we will not pass it. We have to have an expanded majority. We have to have pro-tax reform Democrats and people that support progressive revenue. So I do think capital gains is in our reach. I will continue to proudly support that, whether as a prime sponsor or co-sponsor, however that shakes out, I will be there. I think some of the other proposals we had on the table, including, as I mentioned, the progressive real estate excise tax, a tax on when homes are sold, and that is a tax that can often be picked up by the buyer rather than the seller. Not always, but it can be. We looked at something that charged a little bit different if you're selling a $250,000 house versus, for instance, a $5 million house. Thought that was a great option. We'd like to bring that forward. I am truly really interested in B&O tax reform. Taxes on gross receipts just is a really weird system. There is no consensus in the business community about what the alternative should be, except people say they want to tax they want to tax profits, but then they have to remind themselves that that's an income tax, and then they get really squirrely. So I'm part of a bipartisan work group this summer going out to do meetings across the state with a Republican colleague. In the long term, what I believe, I want to see comprehensive tax reform. I believe that it should include not only a capital gains tax, but an income tax. I believe that the only way that we're ever going to be able to have that conversation is if we have a conversation about income tax as part of comprehensive tax reform. We need to explain to people that, if we could do things like introduce an income tax to buy down the sales tax, maybe we get people's attention. People don't even want to have that conversation. How we get there, there is a lot of work to do, even within the Democratic caucus, and helping to give people the tools. It's not that they're not educated about it, that they're scared. And so I think that the work that folks like me can do to educate them and give them the language to talk about it will go a long way.
Okay. Clayton, number 2.
What can and will you do in the legislature to help cities like Seattle address the related crises of homelessness and high housing costs?
Great, thanks for the question. So I do think we have some pretty big things to be proud of this year in terms of addressing housing homelessness. One of the biggest things is we do make a lot of investments right now in creating access to affordable housing, but we were hearing that some of those programs we use to create vouchers for housing, to help subsidize housing, that people were being turned away from those housing options solely because they were using a voucher, whether that was Section 8 or state-based vouchers. So I was incredibly proud to support the source of income discrimination law this year, banning that discrimination. And looking at systemic policy pieces like that we can address is actually a really good way to think about tackling the broader problem. The Housing Trust Fund is an incredible resource in our capital budget to help low-income housing developers build and expand affordable housing. We have increased funding for that. We've tried, we need to do more. I think we also, we do have to think about the root causes of homelessness, and obviously the cost of living in this region is a huge part of that. We have only so much control. I was happy to support the bill, co-sponsor the bill to lift the ban on rent control, and so we can actually have that conversation in the city of Seattle. Sadly, that went nowhere. And so I think what we can do is, try to invest in programs that we know work, look at systemic things. We know a lot of the folks, not all, but a lot of folks are dealing with mental health challenges, substance use disorders. We have a real limitation. We're underfunding community health beds and actually having a place for folks to go. I'm a true believer in the housing first policy, and so getting people into housing regardless of where they're at with their sobriety or their mental health is critical to people actually stabilizing. I know that from firsthand experience with my own family, how critical that is. So I think we expand affordable housing as well as the wraparound services that help people get stabilized.
David, number 3.
Many community members and transit supporters are proposing a west of 15th tunnel alignment for rail to Ballard. Sound Transit has indicated they will need additional funding to make this possible. Is this something you would support? More broadly, do you support finding new revenues to accelerate ST3 project delivery?
Interesting question. So let me start with the question around finding new revenue to accelerate ST3 project delivery. So that question has actually not come to me yet. So I'm sort of surprising to hear that question in this context. I will tell you, generally, like as a value, I absolutely support. I'm thinking about it in the context of like the reality of what we can do in the legislature and how hard we had to fight to protect the current Sound Transit funding this last couple of sessions. I was proud to stand with several other legislators from the Seattle delegation to sort of ensure that if we were going to look at changing the MBET schedule for the Sound Transit funding model, that we backfilled any funding that was lost, and that we didn't backfill it by pitting transit against foster kids, for instance. And they could not come up with a solution to do that, and so I and others indicated we would vote no, and that bill did not come to a vote. So when we spent a big chunk of this last session defending the current funding for Sound Transit, I'm a little skeptical on our ability to actually expand that. Do I support a model, or what's the word I'm looking for? The alignment west of 15th? Sure. 15th is already pretty crowded, pretty tough to get through there on high traffic times. And so something west of 15th would be great. I'd be interested in having a conversation and hearing what some of the ideas are for revenue. But frankly, it's not a conversation that's been brought to me yet. So I'm sort of interested to hear more from you guys. Maybe that's something we can talk about afterwards, about what people are talking about. Great.
Number 4.
Number 4. It says, despite the passage of the recent education funding bills, Seattle Public Schools remain underfunded. What can and will you do to address this?
Yeah, great question. So I think one of the biggest things I can do is continue to fight for progressive revenue. I think in the current climate, the best we could do was offer a revenue neutral capital gains bill to help buy down some of the property tax and expand the senior property tax exemption. Sadly, that long-term solution was not supported. We got some one-time tax relief. That's what you can do when you have a 1-vote majority in either House and the Senate. So I'd like to see us go back to talking about additional funding for schools. When I think about the broader fight around tax reform, we are losing the battle in the conversation about the tools themselves. It's complicated. People don't understand mechanisms like capital gains and things like that. And so more and more I'm thinking about how do we put forward what our values are, what are the programs we want to fund, and attach the revenue source to them directly so people know what they're buying. I think that's oftentimes why school levies are so incredibly successful in our area, not in other parts of the state, but generally people support their school levies because they know what they're getting. And so when I think about what's not being funded by McCleary, we're underfunding special education. The basic funding formula, I think, kind of undersold us on school guidance counselors and mental health counselors, certainly on school nurses. I know a lot of parents, particularly ones with kids with allergies, have grave concerns about not having a presence of nurses on every school campus throughout the school day. I think we need more access to librarians and more technology in our schools. That's becoming imperative to kids being able to operate in a modern economy. And I feel like that might be the direction we need to go in terms of thinking about, okay, we're going to look at this revenue source tied to this specific kind of bag of goods, I guess is a weird way to say it, but tangible things that people understand, that they value, that they care about for us to get there. I will keep trying on the tools themselves and try to push that forward, but I think more and more that might be a way for us to go. So, yeah.
Great. So now we'll open up to follow-up questions. These are 1-minute answers, and we will start with Ben.
What will we be doing next session to advocate for universal health care?
Yes, so I will once again co-sponsor the Washington Healthcare Security Trust bill. I'd be happy to prime it, but I think somebody else that's on the healthcare committee will probably be doing that rather than me. And just to be a very vocal advocate for it internally. Quite frankly, we as the House Democrats in our retreat, which we call the advance because Democrats don't retreat. Frankly, we were presented polling by the same person that's done polling for our caucus for many years, and the reality is the public opinion on healthcare and universal healthcare, single payer, that language, it is completely flipped on its head. The majority of the people are with us. And there is not really a single, yes, exactly, thank you, Bernie. And there is not a lot of difference between the language of universal healthcare and single payer. Universal healthcare is better. So just reminding my colleagues and helping to be a good messenger internally for that. I think we'll get there. I think it's gonna have renewed life in a long session when the public has clearly shifted in their opinion on this topic. And honestly, I think that's the best thing we can do for increasing access to the American dream when I think about what I prioritize. Universal healthcare would be a big step in the right direction. Yeah.
Great. Additional questions? Clayton, and then Ben.
We have a dynamic which involves a building climate that is quite hot, housing inflation that has gone completely nuts,
Yeah.
homelessness which has gone completely nuts. We are one of 9 states out of 50 that do not have a personal income tax. I kind of want to find a wall. I'm glad the walls are relatively far away because I would have to bang my head against one. But what is it that I'm missing in this scenario? In that we're talking about transit to Ballard, we're talking about increases in revenue in all kinds of ways for all kinds of reasons. We're talking about, in effect, the substrate of Prop 13 in California. I'm worried that our social contract, when we have a city councilman who was assaulted and physically thrown out of a public event, I'm afraid that our civic contract is in danger.
Yeah.
So, comments?
Yeah, I mean, it's, thanks, Clayton. We are deeply divided right now. Truly, very deeply divided. And it's pretty hard to watch, actually. And so, I think we all have different ways that we can contribute to this. I think my personal contribution, and it's been sort of interesting, you know, when I came into the legislature, and I had one of my my Democratic colleagues tell me, you had quite a reputation coming in, you were gonna be hyper partisan, you weren't gonna be able to work with anyone. And I was like, geez, what a reputation I had coming in. And the follow-up comment was, and boy, have you figured out how to work down here. You know, one colleague said, I love watching you work with the Republicans. And so I think the best thing that I can do is try to lead by example and say, you know, there are places where we can find common agreement without compromising our values. We can find ways to meet in the middle. I mean, I could not have passed the juvenile justice reform without the 9 Republicans that voted for the bill in the House. And we should celebrate those wins when we can come together and use it as an example to say, maybe we should talk about the nuances and where we agree. So.
Additional questions? Ben, that's right.
How will you fight to repeal the ban on local rent control and regulation in the next session?
I mean, it's a great question. I will tell you that if income tax is the third rail of politics in the state of Washington, rent control is right behind it. You know, honestly, and somebody said this, we had a great question at the town hall last Saturday about California bringing forward this proposal to change zoning sort of within a mile of high rapid transit, and could we do something in that in the legislature? And my response was, if we as the city of Seattle have not had these conversations and figured out where we are collectively and can be a unified voice as sort of a progressive area of the state, it makes it very hard for us to do that in Olympia. And so I think if we are going to get there, and this kind of goes back to Clayton's question too, tackling affordable housing and tackling homelessness, it's happening everywhere in the state. It looks a little different in everywhere in the state. I think more work could be done as a region to figuring out what those common solutions are. So like, I'm happy to support it, and I'm being completely honest about what I think the chances are. And I think we have to have a thoughtful conversation in our own backyard and come to some consensus before we can go down to Olympia and fight hard to make it. So it's tough.
Additional questions? Nicole?
Yes.
Sure. Please describe a situation in which you took a controversial position and explain how you handled that.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. So I have been one of the most outspoken critics of preferential tax rates and tax breaks in the legislature. I am on the finance committee. I am often a no vote with tax breaks going out of committee. And there have been any number of cases, particularly last session, partially, or the 2017 session, and this session as well, where you look up at the board and it's 97-1, and I am the one no vote. I think we have over 700 tax breaks or preferential rates right now. While some have merit individually, the cumulative effect is really undermining our ability to run our state in a thoughtful way. Those are all, anytime we forego revenue, we're making a policy choice. And so, yeah, I mean, I voted, I had a B&O, it was for fishing fleet improvements, and it was our own district, and I sat in front of our maritime industry at the yacht club in Magnolia and told them I was gonna vote no and why, and to their faces. I said, listen, I need to explain to you where I'm coming from. This is why. It's not that I don't value you, is my problem with the whole system. And they were like, while we're frustrated with that, like, we understand where you're coming from and what you're trying to accomplish. And I did that with the arts community last year with the film tax. I did it with the martial arts community with their tax exemption, and people respect, they respect what I'm trying to accomplish, even if they're frustrated with my vote.
Time for another question or two.
Come on, guys.
Ben?
How are you advocating for the spread of net neutrality now that we've passed our statewide net neutrality?
So great question, and I'm glad you brought this up. So what I really need to do is follow up with my, not my seatmate, but my floor desk mate, as I like to say, Drew Hansen, who is the prime sponsor, was the prime sponsor of the net neutrality bill. I jokingly said to him, like, we need to go on the road, we need to get the show on the road. I don't think he took me seriously. I don't think Drew knows how big a deal this is. No, you know what's funny? Drew, who is a total nerd, and he calls himself that all the time, is a real policy nerd. And he's done a really good job of kind of getting out, talking to the media, explaining what we did there. But I think, to your point of earlier conversations, talking to our friends and other progressive states and asking about kind of their steps in modeling that. I should probably talk more to my desk mate about what are the next steps that we can take there and be as helpful as I can. The great news about the net neutrality bill, it was actually super bipartisan. It is super, super populist. Like, the people get it. They want access and freedom on the internet to be protected. And I think it's really the cable companies and other internet service providers that we're fighting against, not the Republicans. So it's a good fight to fight. Thank you.
All right, we're out of time. If you want to take 30 seconds for a closing statement.
Thanks. Oh my goodness, so many things. Well, it's just, it's an honor and a privilege to serve in this position. People ask me all the time if I'm enjoying myself. Heck, yes, I enjoy this so much. I love fighting for the 36th district. I love representing the 36th district and serving the entire state of Washington. I have really taken it upon myself to be a voice for our district, but also other parts of the state, and was just in Port Angeles on Thursday last week, talking about economic development and economic opportunities for people in rural Washington too. I think that's a really important thing for us to do as Seattle legislators. So happy to serve our district, and would welcome the opportunity to have your vote for re-election. Thanks.